Today, I'm going to talk to you about customization, but not just any customization. Oh no, I'm not talking about this. And believe me, there's a lot to talk about this. But instead, we're going to talk a little more about this. That's right, we're getting into the image editor. And more specifically, I'm going to teach you guys a little bit about actually using it by actually kind of making something in it. And what better place to start than our boy Clippy. This is going to be probably a little bit silly, but you know, I'm perfectly fine with that. Without further ado though, ladies and gentlemen, let's kind of get into this. Now, let's start with a fresh, clean slate. And next, let's kind of consider a little bit, would you, the kind of colors we might be wanting. Or even that, the shapes. Before the colors, we want to consider the shapes. Trust me, this does actually make a huge difference in this case scenario. Because we can come up with any amount of grays that coincides well with Clippy. He is basically a paperclip made of metal, so that part is not too much science to work out. Instead, we should focus a little more on his shape. In this case, we know Clippy is, well, he's a paperclip. And what do paperclips do? They're shaped kind of like this. Almost like a pill shape. Both sides. So, we're going to do something a little bit like so. Going to rotate that all the way around 180 degrees. But wait, there's something about this that isn't adding up just yet. Now, if we save this and look back at some of our references we have going on here, we know Clippy goes from big to little, and then to smaller yet, with these shapes going inside and inside more in a clockwise fashion. So now that we got that fact settled, let's actually shrink this down a little bit. But before we get too comfortable right there, let's actually do another thing. Now, to get the hollow sort of features of Clippy, we want to start something kind of like this, where we have a duplicate of the original thing, because it's going to continue the same shape relatively. But here's the real magic of using this as a trick. Okay, so we are going to use the layer controls option. Then we're going to go to toggle mask. We're going to press that again. Now, what has happened? Now, this is basically the inversion of the toggle mask, where anything that is underneath the exact shape of this layer is basically completely hidden. In which case, if we shrink this down, we see the layer's size and fullness and its overall influence on the layers below it. And this is going to be how we're really going to take shape of Clippy. This is going to be the real bread and butter to how we're going to manipulate the design. And we're not going to do that just once, but we're going to have to do that again here with this other portion. Now, something I've noticed is that if you're fighting this thing with its proportions when you shrink things to try to line up the edges, overall just kind of like move it around and resize it again one way or another and see until it kind of fits just well enough, really. That is like the best you can hope for. It will make your life so much simpler using that as a method. And we're actually going to do a very similar trick in the process with the layer controls with the toggle mask for this one also. And look how very neatly that's already taken some shape. But before we forget, let's at least have one of these going for our next inside here. Okay, it's back to 0 degrees, and now we're going to kind of shrink it. If I'm not mistaken, it is relatively here in height. Or actually, I do believe it is a little bit lower. No, it actually is, I'm really second guessing myself right now. I do think it is fairly close to this thing on the right, but a little bit different. Because the thing on the right, the very end of the paperclip, it actually goes outwards to our right in the actual design of Clippy. And this is supposed to go a little bit more up. But I know for a fact that my other examples use the reference quite correctly. So actually I'm going to take that quick gander just to be sure. Pretty close to the center, okay. So actually we do want this shorter and probably a little lower. Because it is supposed to be almost like his makings of a face, the smile in it. Now we're gonna do this business again. Now, even though I've done this a good few times, I still make the common mistake of just sort of pressing the wrong interaction order. So don't feel bad if you do that at all. I swear that's just, it's weird if you don't. But as you can see, it's already looking very paperclip-like. But there's a little certain details we need to account for. Details that have to be addressed. And that is indeed that bit on the right, like I was talking about. It does move over to our right. So what we're going to do is that we are going to strategically do the toggle mask second option, the inverted option, and we're going to move it down so it only affects the bottom layer. And then we're going to position this strategically, and I would say relatively here should be fine. You don't need it quite this massive. Alright. Now let's ponder out options we can use to better convey what should be his arm briefly. We don't need to get too complicated about it. In fact, this is pretty much good enough right here. Go like that, and a little more like this. That's actually quite fitting for him. I think I might move this just a couple down. Might actually move that's an adjustment. And there. We have our general Clippy shape. And then like this, we create the group, and we have retained his shape. Now some of you are already concerning, but what about his color? Well, that's what the clipping feature is the most useful for actually is controlling where colors can appear by using the shape over top of the layers that we want to construct the color placements on. But first let's have this about here. Next let's move it down. Then we're going to go here, toggle mask once, and now we're going to tinker with the color a little bit. And now, see how it affects it? These are very simple tricks, and they go a long way really hard. Just because the grid isn't doing anything for us here, we can actually turn that off. Kind of like disable it with the show piece option on our right. Now for me, the command is left trigger Y, which also allows you to do it like this. Set it into like this gray format, but I prefer the black myself, usually. If something uses black or close to black, I might prefer the gray instead, or at least for a time being to work with something specific. Or I might even set a specific background color, or in like terms of a square piece, to something incredibly bright. All just depends on what I'm really doing. But in this case scenario, we're working on what's inside this this hemisphere of Clippy. Now let's take into account of Clippy's shape for this now. And we want to keep in mind we're probably wanting fairly geometric lighting behaviors with Clippy. So let's do something along the lines of this. Move that down. Now, the smartest way to do this actually would be to do the outside first and inside last. And you're about to see why. Okay. Okay, back to 180 degrees. But this is one of the best ways to be utilizing the angle on our right. Otherwise, size and position, that depends on mostly your intended use of scaling. In this case scenario, we don't have a whole lot crazy really going on here. But it looks like our closest option is something along the lines of this. Which is actually fine because at a certain placement, this actually will not be very noticeable as intrusive in any way, shape, or form. And allow me to actually explain that a sec. Now, when it comes to recreating Clippy, he actually has a shadow on his left side relative to having like an eyeball there. So that's going to be a freebie of, hey, you can be a little messy here. It's going to be a little distorted anyway. But we're going to want back this color still. So we're going to take this, move it up. Probably want to get that same general shape going on here. And of course we're going to want to shrink it up. Now, generally speaking, we can do this with the rectangular piece. It's just if you're doing this normally in any other circumstance, you might not have this kind of same leniency of sizing of space to just use the rectangle as opposed to this. In which case, this would be your safer bet. Because like you could have like it's like a corner clipping like over here or something. Or like down here. Like right here if it's like the right size or something. You never know. So it's like just sort of simplify it for yourself and stick to similar shapes. And that does usually bode quite well. As you can see, this actually scaled fairly half reasonably right here. Though I am curious, doesn't seem like it sneaks any closer. I do think that is a consequence of how I sized this initially. Like, without it down in my head, you can definitely get a little closer in this. In fact, I have had it more precise looking before. But we're not going to worry about that this time. Okay. Now let's talk about those shadows. Now, because they're a little more, actually, let's use this. When it comes to the geometry of Clippy, I often like using this the most. Kind of like thinning it out. It's a little tricky to... see it correctly. That's looking a little more correct to me. Right there. Just because I saw that slight gap in the top. Okay, now let's do that to over this way. But actually a little lower. The thing about Clippy's eye on this side is that it's lower. And for whatever reason, it casts a little bit less shadow. Or at least right here it does. But if I recall correctly, he also casts a little bit of shadow like right here. In that kind of a goofy way. Trying not to let it get too intrusive. There we are. I'd say that looks fairly decent. But before we go causing any sorts of messes or means of being disorganized, let's actually merge these down as a created group. Like that. It's like, actually, I do remember a slight funky detail. Hold that thought. Up on top right, he actually has that rounded shading going from the inside to the outside. I'm actually surprised I just remembered that. Yeah, it's something like that. Almost like completely forgot about that. And now for the real piece of resistance. Clippy's eyeballs. You know you've waited for it all your life. Don't even pretend. But we're looking for roughly a form of 70-degree angle. Or sorry, 90-degree angle. So if we're turning this to the right, it's 270 degrees. If we were doing it to the... Sorry, if we were doing this counterclockwise, it's 270 degrees. Regular clockwise, it would be just regular 90 degrees. If you're good at that kind of conversion math, this is going to be pretty easy for you. I do worry we have this inside bit a little too tall. So I do think actually... There, that's looking a little more correct to me. Because I feel like you didn't have nearly so much space, a lack of space going like upwards from his eyeballs. But he's kind of like in more, so they're more part of his face. Fun little trick I like to do. At the color. Let's do 218. Bottom one, color. .218. Doesn't have to be precise in this case scenario, but in this case I just kind of am right now. So I believe that was 4 down. 6 down. Oh, in sets of 3, okay. Or sets of 2. So it's just 3 clicks. And I just want this up a little more. And this gives his eyeballs depth. For very little effort, mind you. And classic Clippy's eyes have black pupils. I'm actually just gonna copy this so it's already at the same size and in right color. And all he's missing now is quite literally his eyebrows. Just trying to retrace my steps a little bit internally. I know there's some kind of shape that suffices quite well with this matter. I want to say it's related to these. Just kind of take another quick look around. Could actually be one of these. I do think it's actually one of these. Specifically this. And this is just going to be straight up black. Going to do it this way. Rotate it all the way around. I think it is a little longer usually. But he has like a more like less sinister, like less serious sort of character aura to him. So we do want these kind of like lifted up more usually. And that makes them look less expecting and more humble. And less like you're trying to impress him and more like, he's fine. You got this, I'm sure. I do want to kind of get rid of these points here. We are going to do this just so I can better make that out. Do one of these jobs. And there we have a very convincing Clippy. Alright, had to pause for a sec. But you can see how very like how much you can make something probably more complicated to do, or like easier to do it. And this is one of those examples of how more simplistic you can keep it. Overall, there's all kinds of witty ways you can treat lots of stuff you might be hoping to create. But a fun way to treat stuff like this that I've kind of picked up on the more recent end is taking stuff like this and set all the way back. And then we're going to change the color. Then we can do a lot of things with it from here. I forgot where I was at with that. I thought I was outside of that. Let's see. Copy, insert. If we change the color, this doesn't affect the layer that was below it. But something else we can do is we can set a gradient, And this would make this layer transparent and only visible in these sorts of patterns of gradual appearance, I should say, of a style based on which part of these is white being the strongest and which part is the darkest, empty space being which parts it's the least visible. So let's say I did this. Let's say I did edit color just for a little more proof of concept. We're going back to this, but edit color, make it a little more green. Let's actually change this to a more suitable option. Let's make this a different kind of green. Something a little bit stronger. But this does improve the sense of what used to be the Windows backgrounds of those times. I feel like this is the wrong kind of green though. We can be a little more precise about that by taking like screenshots of it and opening it up into a photo editing program. And when we can pick the color, we can go down to these three things here and copy their exact RGBs as exact references of the color. So that is absolutely an option. There's all kinds of really creative stuff we can do with this kind of stuff. But this is really more of a tutorial of not just how to make Clippy, but also what you can really do with the tools in this image editor. And you have all these shapes, you have a few preset fonts you can work with. The shame about the fonts is that each letter is its own layer. So it's like, if you wanted to comprise this thing of a lot of text, you'd be limited to exactly 128 layers of only text. At most. And that decreases with any other layers you want to fit in. So there are certain limitations, but the fact that it's 128 layers, the creative minded might come up with something really inventive. Like you might come up with alternatives to creating certain shapes. There's all kinds of things I myself have tried out before. And believe me, I've tried out a lot of things. But yeah, I do hope this has given quite a lot of inspiration. In case might have a better grip of understanding of how you could, say, recreate a character you've seen in a very cartoonistic design into this game or something. Now, given more organic shapes are going to be significantly more trial and error, not so simple, but you have all the room to make little tiny adjustments till you think you got it right. And ultimately, that's going to be a matter of playing around with certain shapes, maybe certain tones of color. Maybe taking unusual shapes and then having something go through it and making parts of it go missing. You can move this around. You can rescale it smaller. You can't make it bigger, mind you. So wherever you set it from its dead center of the screen is going to play a huge role whenever you do rescale or turn this kind of stuff. However, what's interesting is that if you make this into a toggle mask, this is literally what you're able to do. It's a little wacky, it's a little silly even, but I do think this is absolutely awesome. And of course you can do it this way also. And say if I took something like this, did something like this, and wanted to just apply it to over this or something. Say we undid the mask part, we just want to do this to it instead with its own mask. That is absolutely an option. And if we ungroup it, it remembers how the layers were prior and the components of all those layers and all that. And it does still track the amounts of layers inside groups, mind you, so keep stuff like that in mind. So you can get pretty chaotic, elaborate with this stuff as a overall toy, almost. It's like it's pretty much a tool, but I myself could treat it like a toy. And of course it might be beneficial to some to just group all the stuff together and move it as one singular unit. Maybe you want to rescale him and put him in a variety of scenarios. Maybe you're gonna give him a little, like, I don't know, a dirt hut Minecraft house or something. You can get pretty silly, and I'm really curious to what kind of silly little things other people might be making when they realize how these tools like work. Just because I want to see his dirt hut. I don't know if Windows back then could run Java, but if it did, Clippy would be a happy boy. I don't know about anyone else, but I think Clippy would be proud. Although he'd probably also patronize us. Just like, it looks like you're trying to build a dirt hut. Here's some guides on a better house. Or here's what I found on the web. But yeah, thank you so much for watching if you indeed had. And I don't know if I'm going to make any more of these sorts of tutorials, but if I do, I do. Maybe I'll come up with something else pretty simple and fun to make. But I think something I would do differently though in that I did here is probably make Clippy's eyes just a little bit wider. I do think that would go a long way. But yeah, take it easy folks, and you have yourselves a great day. Bye bye.